Welcome back to another episode of Insights with Experts, where we aim to encourage and foster discussion, learning, and creating an informed global community. To view this and other interviews in detail, head over to theseer.org, linked in the description. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our channel for constant updates. Enjoy the episode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights with Experts. Joining us here today, we are very, very fortunate to have with us Molina Asthana. Now, Molina has a vast background in law, sport, mentoring, advising, as well as numerous other things, which I'm sure we're going to learn a little bit about here as well. In addition to currently acting as a vice president of the Law Institute of Victoria, she currently sits on the boards of Gymnastics Victoria, Good Shepard, Graduate House of the University of Melbourne, as well as numerous other boards, as well as starting a variety of initiatives such as the Multicultural Women in Sport. Molina is immersed in numerous fields, which, as I said, I'm sure we're going to hear all about in this interview. So, Molina, just to start off, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. Not many of the guests which we've interviewed are actually in the same city as we are, so it's always nice to have somebody here in Melbourne with me. Just to start, how are you? How are things?
I'm good, thanks. And thanks for inviting me to be on this as well. I guess COVID has been difficult for everyone, but Zoom has all connected us across the world. So you've got people today who from sitting in the UK, which is fantastic. So it's great to be able to interact with people. There have been negatives and positives, I think, during that time. Yeah. We're all hoping to get back to normalcy soon.
So Molina, just the first question we would like to ask you. And essentially what we want to start off with is, I guess, an overview of your journey. I gave a very rough overview of who you were, but could you maybe talk to us about, what that looked like, what made you want to go into law, what made you want to go into sport, essentially what did that journey look like to stand where you currently stand now?
Yeah, so it's a little bit long, so I'll try to sort of put it in a shorter version. Basically, the legal sector, because my family is all of lawyers and judges, so the dinner table conversations were always about cases and things. But when I moved to Australia, I really struggled to find a job in the legal sector. I had practiced already for 7 years in India, then I moved to Australia. I did my Masters of Law at Melbourne University with very good grades. But recruiters said that I was unlikely to find a job at a top tier or a mid-tier firm, so I should apply to smaller firms. I kept trying and approaching partners directly, seeking interviews with people I knew through my contacts, and eventually I landed up with a job at the top tier firm. And then from there it went off to another top tier, and also then to the government, and I have my own practice now. Why I want to talk about my story is because and what I went through in finding a job here and the struggles that I faced here is because that is what kind of inspired me to mentor other people as well. So I think there was the thing that really struck me the most in my time at big law firms was the diversity was not valued in the legal profession as compared to other professions or indeed Australian society as a whole. So being different meant that you had to try harder to prove yourself. You always face unconscious bias every day from your colleagues who only want to talk to you, where to find out who gave you the work. There's a competitive culture. And then when you mingle with them socially, you're expected to join them for drinks, be part of the steak club, talk footy, and know all about the TV shows they watched or the private schools they went to. Makes it very difficult for someone who has grown up overseas and is a migrant. So I know it's very difficult to change these cultures overnight. However, I decided to do something about it, to challenge these systems and overcome the bamboo ceiling we Asians face. So the challenges I personally faced pushed me to take up these additional roles and crusade for a lot of the things that I believe will benefit others like me and the future generations. So as you mentioned, I sit on a number of boards and have taken up leadership roles as well. And I'll come to the sporting bit later as well. And that's where I wanted to say, that's where mentoring fits in well, because I want to support others who may have faced similar barriers as me. I mentor on our Asian Australian Lawyers Association program at Melbourne Uni Law School and various Leadership Victoria programs. And mentoring can be really useful for people of diverse background who are looking for role models, for someone who has paved the way for them and has made it easier for them to tread down the same path. So that's why I suppose a little bit of my journey in law I guess my foray into the sporting sector was very much by chance. I really wasn't a sports person before I moved to Australia. But when I did come here, I saw everyone around me sort of running, cycling, participating in team sport, walking, and I decided I'm going to start running. First I was running by myself, then I joined a running group at work, and then for a number of years now I've been running half marathons. So I felt sport has increased my confidence. It gave me the strength of mind and body, helped me overcome stressful situations, and generally helped me get accustomed to the Australian way of life and the workforce. But despite these advantages, I just find very few women of multicultural backgrounds participate in sport, and that is because they face a lot of barriers in participation. And that's why I started my not-for-profit called Multicultural Women in Sport, which is to help women of diverse background engage in sport as a means of empowerment, their well-being, and a sense of belonging. This didn't start from day one. I was initially doing community work through sitting on boards, and I was asked to become an ambassador for AFL, and then for Cricket Australia, and then for the Commonwealth Games, and then the Jean Haley's Women's Health Ambassador. And through these various roles, I saw the lack of diversity in the sporting sector, and I started my work. And then I was appointed as a commissioner with the AFL Southeast Commission and Gymnastics Victoria Board, and also the Tribunal for the Football Federation of Victoria. So I guess the common theme for all my work, whether it's in the law or in the community or in sport, has been about creating greater diversity in all these sectors and ensuring equality of access for people like myself.
You touched briefly about the lack of diversity in sports and for women and people of multicultural background. You're the first person of Indian descent to be on the board of the Law Institute of Victoria. So I guess, what is your view of the state of representation and the diversity of representation, and what's the future of it?
Yeah, so I think obviously there is a lack of diversity at the top levels. Definitely in most professions in Australia, we are far behind. We lag far behind what is being done in the US or UK in this diversity and inclusion space. That's evident. There's a lot of things that can be done. There are things that are obviously there's a movement right now, and it has become stronger because of the Black Lives Matter movement as well. But there's a lot that still needs to be done. I think from a personal point of view, what one can do is, a lot of people are inspired by role models, and if they see someone like them in leadership positions, they're more likely to aspire for similar roles and take active steps in that regard. But for people like me, when I see that there are no role models, that motivates me to challenge the status quo and be the first one to achieve what someone else hasn't been able to. But part of the reason for doing it so is also to create pathways for other people to be able to follow. I therefore encourage others to plan their own journeys and strive to be their best. But from a wider perspective, you can see, to see more multicultural presence, I think we need to equip others to be able to thrive in difficult and challenging environments. I think for years we have been advocating for greater diversity in various sectors and have been doing it aggressively, but we haven't seen that much change. I find that a victim mentality sometimes doesn't help. So instead of harping too much about why we should be given opportunities, which everyone knows why we should be given opportunities, and that we have been wronged, we need to be able to acquire the skills that will make us resilient to withstand those challenges and play on our strengths and learn from the experiences of others. I speak from my own lived experience. I have been knocked back so many times I can't even remember, but I have the resilience to stand up and go again. So I'm proud of my heritage and very aware of my strengths and weaknesses. And that has been the main reason that I've been able to foray into spaces that are predominantly occupied by Anglo-Celtic men. So I can go on talking about policy change, government action, corporate initiatives, and D&I, but we hear about them every day. And we know that steps are being taken in this regard. But but as I said, we're far behind. I think it's more about our personal journeys. For me, that empowers us.
And so with that, I wanted to ask, what place does the law have in this new world? And, let's say I'm not a law student. Let's say I'm a scientist. Let's say I'm an economist like myself. To what extent should I get involved in law? And what can I potentially gain from having a knowledge of law?
So I think law is a great degree to acquire and a great profession to follow. But of course, not everyone will have the time or inclination to do a law degree. I think a basic understanding of law gives you the knowledge of how civil society functions and generally makes you aware of your rights and obligations. That's really important in your day-to-day life anyways, and for any work that you do as well. I think there are definitely cross-applicable benefits to it. Some of them may be evident with just doing a law degree, like the analytical abilities you learn, formulating arguments, working on hypothesis, and if you're so inclined to pursue activism as well. Some of the benefits may come from a few years of practice, such as good communication and negotiation skills, knowledge of various industries if you deal with a variety of clients, the knowledge of how legislation operates, and the knowledge of governance. Like I've gone into governance now because of my legal background to a large extent.
Going back, I guess, to your background and how you got into law, did you ever have a mentor or a role model during your journey? And if so, what made this mentor so memorable to you, and how did that person help you?
Yeah, so I always say that you learn your values at home. So for me, I guess it was my grandfather who was my biggest role model. He was a well-known jurist. He was a judge that was renowned for his honesty and his judgments that reflected social justice. He was a painter, an author, and a speaker. I saw him work hard. I saw him care about people and someone who always looked at goodness in everyone and a positive in every situation. He also lived an extremely healthy lifestyle, went for a walk, did yoga and meditation every day, ate healthy. And that is why I think he lived to a ripe old age of 92 when he was still doing arbitrations, both national and international. So we had to actually get some of his arbitrations cancelled after his death. So I think it is from him that I get my passion for access to justice and a commitment to serve the community. So he instilled in me a respect for the law and human rights. And that has been the cornerstone of all the work that I do.
What can you gain as a mentor?
I think it's always important to give back, and mentoring is a way of giving back and also empowering the next generation. Some students are natural leaders, like all of you guys, and I think with that comes a responsibility to be a good role model as well as provide support to fellow students. So I would definitely encourage students to mentor where they are able to, and not only does it support others, but it's also a journey of self-realization and a learning from another person with a different perspective. I always find that all the mentoring roles that I've undertaken, that relationship has benefited both. So I think if students were to mentor other students, they would probably learn quite a bit from the other students as well. I think it's a win-win situation. Plus, it looks really good on the CV. It will help you in the future when you're looking for jobs, as it demonstrates that you took on responsibility and a leadership role.
Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. To learn more about Orakui as well as more information about our upcoming episodes, don't forget to follow our socials for constant updates and education content. Links are always in the description.
So, as Lady Hale articulated when she addressed the Women Lawyers Division of the Law Society, she said, "I can think of a few judgments where my experience and perceptions of life made a difference to my view of the law. Often, but not always, a view which my brethren were then persuaded to share. As a woman of colour who's been successful in the field of law, do you believe that the inherent issue of implicit bias present in the common law system should be tackled in order to create more equitable judicial diversity in Australia?"
Absolutely, absolutely spot on. I think the legal profession in most Commonwealth countries has traditionally been the domain of the privileged. And this phenomenon becomes pronounced in countries where the population is diverse and like in Australia, and it could be UK and the US as well. And the underrepresentation of the changing demograph leads to the perpetuation of the bamboo ceiling, as we've seen. You barely see women or people of color in senior professions and senior positions in the legal profession, nor do you see them in the judiciary. And that lack of diversity at that level creates an access of justice issue as well, which needs to be addressed. And the other issue with it is being the domain of the privileged is that the laws may not always be amenable to addressing the nuances of diverse cultures as they are used to addressing monocultural issues. Because they've been, the laws have been, the legislation has been passed by people who think in a similar, they don't have much diversity in terms of the people drafting them or keeping in mind people of different backgrounds. So this also creates an inherent bias in the legal system that cannot be overcome unless you have a judiciary that is diverse and can engage in judicial activism to take into account the cultural differences.
You touched on my next question, which is, do you believe that a judge's exercise of discretion is more legitimate when they reflect the communities over which they preside? But then also, do you think that the diversity of judges in Australia adequately reflects current political and social zeitgeist, as well as Australia's women/BAME citizens? And if not, what do you believe is the best way to improve this issue? For example, perhaps reset quotas or local initiatives to encourage minorities to enter the legal sector, which do you think would be the most effective of approaches?
And so I don't think it is a matter of legitimacy as it is of equity. So most judges will deliver justice to the best of their abilities and will apply the law equally. And I've heard that from judges when I talk about diversity. They say, but we are doing our best. However, in doing so, if they don't understand the cultural differences or nuances, sometimes justice is not done. Or even if it is done, it does not seem to have been done. So I'll give you an example of a judge presiding over proceedings where the witness is an Asian person, say, for example. If he or she, the witness lowers their eyes when responding, the judge of an Anglo-Celtic background may think it is because they are lying, whereas the real reason may be because that's their respect for authority. And culturally, they're not meant to look up and speaking to someone of that higher stature. And this is a real scenario which a judge of Greek origin here spoke about in his in a talk that he gave. And another example is of dowry, which is a cultural practice. And I was invited as an expert witness in a manner, and I could not convince the judge that dowry was taken because the judge just didn't understand the concept of dowry. So I felt that justice was denied in that case. So you can see that when judges come from diverse backgrounds, they're more likely to understand these little nuances that go with the culture. However, as we mentioned before, in Australia, cultural diversity is not reflected in the judiciary. We barely see any judges of diverse backgrounds. So I'm also the National Vice President of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. And we did a cultural diversity report about 5 years ago. And what we found was that there was barely 2 or 3 judges of Asian background in the whole country, and they were not even in the senior judiciary. And I don't think much has changed. There are some magistrates and perhaps some in the county court here, but really no one in the higher court. So it's a big issue in Australia, and it needs to be addressed through perhaps a different judicial appointment system. Of course, another way is by quotas. And I do think quotas or at least targets help. But often we face the counter argument of meritocracy, which I think is flawed because if you have 2 people starting at the same level, one will always at different levels, one will always be ahead of the other. And even if somehow the other was to reach the same level, the person who enjoys majority status in society will most likely be given preference. Another way of tackling it is also unconscious bias training. And then as well as we've been talking about compulsory CPDs as well, professional development on diversity and inclusion, that helps as well.
Oh yeah, that's lovely to know that there's some initiatives that will hopefully come into play a little bit more. And so lastly, what do you believe are the key skills that an aspiring lawyer such as myself should cultivate before entering a career in law?
I think it is about taking an interest in things outside of law sometimes, like social causes. So participate in extracurricular activities where you can, because if you're doing a law degree, how will you differentiate yourself from others? It's by doing those other things that perhaps some of the others are not doing. A very important thing that I tell people is to network. Just network a lot. I wasn't getting a job here through recruiters, so I had to go directly. I had to use my contacts to approach partners of big law firms directly and emphasize on the skill sets that I bring, and that's how I got my first job.
If you had one piece of advice to the youth listening, what is that one piece of advice?
I always say be authentic. Don't get into the rat race. Just follow your passion, and your authenticity comes with following your passion. And if you're from another culture, own your diversity.
Thanks for listening in. This podcast has been brought to you by Desire, a platform designed to bridge the gap between the youth and professional. You can read more about us at desire.org. And you can also check out the section titled Insights with Experts, where you can submit your questions that you might have for future experts and industries that you would like to learn more about. And you can also refer in any experts that you might know yourself.